Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Braja Janaranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Nandana Braja Janaranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Tira Vanachari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 oh Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 oh Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 oh Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Paripujakacharya Ashtotarashata Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Abhay Charanaravinda Bhakti Vedanta Goswami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Anantakutta Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. ISKCON Guru Vrinda Ki Jai. Prem se Gaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shri Makunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Shri Navadvip Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Shri Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai. Nu Govardhan Dham Ki Jai. Ganga Mai Ki Jai. Yamuna Mai Ki Jai. Tulsi Devi Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Brihat Mridanga Srila Prabhupada's Transcendental Book Distribution Ki Jai. Shri Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai. Nittai Gaur Premanandi, Hari Hari Bol. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to the divine lotus feet of Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Nasta Preshu Badreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki. By regular attendance in classes on the Srimad Bhagavatam and by rendering service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed, and loving service unto the personality of Godhead, who is praised with transcendental songs, is established as an irrevocable fact. So, let's see. Getting the right glasses here. Give me a second. So we are reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 5th canto, chapter, is it 24, right? Okay, thank you. Chapter 24. One second here, getting up to speed. Huh? 15, okay. Oh, I think it's a little before that, yeah?
It's 24:17 today.
Excuse me? Okay.
Text 17, right?
Okay. All right.
15, text 15.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, Balaram left off, with this one. Okay. The Sudarshan Chakra will not allow their so-called material happiness to endure. Last line of the purport there kind of sticks in your head. Okay, so we are on text 15. And then we'll end up doing 15 through 17 where we have a purport. Okay, so as this is very short Sanskrit, I'll try it. Yasmin parishte suravadunam praya pum shavanam bayad eva shravanti patanti cha. When the Sudarsan disc enters those provinces, the pregnant wives of the demons all have miscarriages due to fear of its effulgence. Who can imagine the effulgence of the Sudarshan chakra, the Supreme Lord? And I think we'll leave the Sanskrit out on this one. My dear king, now I shall describe to you the lower planetary systems, one by one, beginning from Atala. In Atala there is a demon, the son of Mayadanava, named Bala, who created 96 kinds of mystic power. Some so-called yogis and swamis take advantage of this mystic power to cheat people even today. Simply by yawning, the demon Bala created 3 kinds of women known as Swarini, Kamini, and Pumschali. The Swarinis like to marry men from their own group. The Kaminis marry men from any group. And the Pumschalis change husbands one after another. If a man enters the planet of Atala, these women immediately capture him and induce him to drink an intoxicating beverage made with a drug known as hataka, cannabis indica. This intoxicant endows the man with great sexual prowess, of which the women take advantage for enjoyment. A woman will enchant him with attractive glances, intimate words, smiles of love, and then embraces. In this way, she induces him to enjoy sex with her to her full satisfaction. Because of his increased sexual power, the man thinks himself stronger than 10,000 elephants and considers himself most perfect. Indeed, illusioned and intoxicated by false pride, he thinks himself God, ignoring impending death. So we're going to go on to the next verse, but I just wanted to touch on this a little bit. As we were hearing a few chapters ago about the glories of Bhartavarsha, and what really comes up a lot frequently in that section is part of the good fortune. Of course, the culmination of that good fortune is the appearance of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu at this time and place. But also, in general, part of that good fortune is that sukha dukkha. There's some happiness and there's some distress. We can experience things that enliven the mind and the intelligence, to think of, that there's higher standards of living, there's some inspiration there, there's enough suffering to realize that, hey, the whole show is temporary. There's, do I really want to stay in this place? So it's a good balance. And now, as we're exploring the universe, we're seeing that when you don't have this balance, when due to heaps of pious activities, you are in the Nandakanana gardens in Indraloka enjoying with the Apsaras, even though they have a lot of knowledge, they have a really hard time getting serious about devotional service because it just doesn't seem that urgent, right? The very long lives. And here we see, we were just reading about the subterranean hells, and now we're starting to move out of those, even a little lower, this Atala planet. And so here, there's this really, really strong, decadent mood of just really going for sexual enjoyment, right? So, and these, very intense women, and if a man goes there, they make him drink this cannabis indica. I actually looked it up. It's basically the marijuana that grows in India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, that type. Cannabis sativa is more what we're familiar with in the Western world. It's 2 different branches, but apparently they make a beverage out of this, which gives one a lot of potency in that area, and it also intoxicates one, where it goes as far, probably the verse goes as far as that he thinks himself God, ignoring impending death. So when people have the facility to enter more deeply, very specifically into aspects of material existence and material enjoyment, right? So they can completely forget about it because it's so intoxicating, it's so alluring, it's so, and then you have these types of intoxicants. And, I don't get too far off, but when I was young, I met the devotees young. Unfortunately, I'd already met the drug pushers, and I had little experience with illicit drugs. And there was one in those days that people took, and I only took it once. It was called PCP. Afterwards, you felt like you got run over by a freight train. I mean, it was so poisonous, just so abominable. I don't know what it did to your body, But anyway, this point, it made him feel like God. I remember that. Like, you went on this journey and you felt like you were immortal and you felt like you were powerful. And it was like this whole, like, wow, you know. So anyway, you know, horrible stuff, you know what I mean? But anyway, so I guess the point I'm just trying to make is that these things all exist. You know, here you just get little flashes of it, but there they have these kind of things where you don't have the side effects, you know what I mean? You just get the so-called benefits of whatever it is, you know, drinking soma rasa in the heavenly planets and feeling very strong and feeling very enlivened and healthy, and, you know, just creates this whole mood of enjoyment, you know, whether it's here in these darker planets or up in the heavenly planets. But the business, which makes it hard for spiritual realization, is basically the same. It's material enjoyment, you know, maybe a little higher, a little lower in the gradation. So anyway, that's, you know, one of the reasons why we're so fortunate to be here, because, you know, we're not getting, you know, dragged into these types of situations, you know, with such force. So, okay, so now we're going to do the verse with the purport, text 17. The next planet below Atala is Vitala, wherein Lord Shiva, who is known as the master of gold mines, lives with his personal associates, the ghosts and similar living entities. Lord Shiva, as the progenitor, engages in sex with Bhavani, the progenitress, to produce living entities. And from the mixture of their vital fluid, the river named Hataki is generated. When fire, being made to blaze by the wind, drinks of this river and then sizzles and spits it out, it produces gold called Hataka. The demons who live on that planet with their wives decorate themselves with various ornaments made from that gold, and thus they live there very happily. Srila Prabhupada's purport. It appears that when Baba and Bhavani, Lord Shiva and his wife, unite sexually, the emulsification of their secretions creates a chemical which, when heated by fire, can produce gold. It is said that the alchemists of the medieval age tried to prepare gold from base metal, and Srila Sanatana Goswami also states that when bell metal is treated with mercury, it can produce gold. Srila Sanatana Goswami mentions this in regard to the initiation of low-class men to turn them into Brahmins. Sanatana Goswami said, Yatha kanchanatam yati kamsyam rasa vidanata tata diksha vidanena dvijatvam jayate nrinam. As one can transform kamsa, or bell metal, into gold by treating it with mercury, one can also turn a low-born man into a Brahmin by initiating him properly into Vaishnava activities. End quote. The International Society for Krishna Consciousness is trying to turn Malechas and Yavanas into real Brahmins by properly initiating them and stopping them from engaging in meat-eating, intoxication, illicit sex, and gambling. One who stops these four principles of sinful activity and chants the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra can certainly become a pure Brahmin through the process of bonafide initiation, as suggested by Srila Sanatana Goswami. Apart from this, if one takes a hint from this verse and learns how to mix mercury with bell metal by properly heating and melting them, one can get gold very cheaply. The alchemists of the medieval age tried to manufacture gold, but they were unsuccessful, perhaps because they did not follow the right instructions. Om Gyana Timarandasya Garan Garan Shalakaya Chakshurun Minitanyana Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Panchakalpatarubhascha Kripasinubhirvacha Patitanam Pavanibhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So we're mostly going to talk about this wonderful transformative process, as Srila Sanatana Goswami is giving this wonderful analogy. But I just wanted to touch on, when we hear about Baba and Bhavani engaging in sex, the progenitor and the progenitress, and we're reading it in this section of all these people having sex. It's a very different thing. Lord Shiva, Lord Narayan never touches the material energy, but for the purpose of this material world, there needs to be the spirit souls who at the time of universal dissolution merge back into the body of Mahavishnu. When the creation happens again, these cyclical creation, maintenance, and dissolution, they need to re-enter. They're sleeping in the body of Mahavishnu, and they need to re-enter. So at that time, Sa Aikshata, he glances over material nature, and that glance personified is Lord Shiva. And material nature, Mother Durga, she is Bhavani, she is the wife of Lord Shiva. So the husband impregnates the wife. So Lord Shiva is the personified glance of the Lord. And within that glance are all of the Jiva souls who are re-entering this material existence. Sa imal lukshan asrijata. So this is a cosmic process that takes place. So anyway, Bhava and Bhavani, this is on a very high level, so it's not like what we're reading about with these people who have material desires, right? Vaishnavanam yata Shambhu. Lord Shiva is the greatest Vaishnava, right? He's the leader of one of the 4 Vaishnava Sampradayas, like that. So very amazing personality. So, and Srila Prabhupada is quoting Sanatana Goswami, who has taken this example that bell metal, kamsa, can be turned into gold through this alchemical process using mercury and mixing and heating in the right ways. So this is still a bit of a mystery. There was a whole alchemist movement in the Middle Ages, but as far as most people know, they never actually succeeded, right? Although these information was there from older times. But Sanatana Goswami has taken this process and he has applied it in a very beautiful way to describe how ordinary people can become Brahmins and Vaishnavas by this process of purification, right? So this is very, very important for all of us. Sometimes it's like it's like we're standing on the shoulders of giants, like Srila Prabhupada came here and performed this unparalleled devotional service, right, of spreading this Krishna consciousness all over the world and writing his books in such a way and setting such a personal example that ordinary people all over the world could understand Krishna consciousness, could assimilate it, could take it up, could follow it, could benefit from it, and could come to the standard of pure devotional service, right? And this is no small thing, right? This, you see throughout the scriptures, this has been explained, right? This has been explained. Shukadeva Goswami describing Kerata Hunanda Polinda Pukasha Abhira Shumba Yavana Kasa Adaya Yanye Cha Papa Yada Pashraya Shraya Shujanti Tasmai Prabhavishnave Namaha. He explained that he described all of the non-Vedic sinful races of the earth, Greeks, Turks, Yavanas, Malechas, Khasas, Mongolians. He described Hunas, Germanic tribes. He described all of these. Everything was known. The world, at time of Maharaj Yudhishthira, the whole world was one empire, like that. So all these areas were there, but some of them weren't strictly following the Vedic principles. And Shukadeva Goswami explained that even all of these people who aren't following the Vedic principles, who may be performing sinful activities, eating meat, drinking, all these things going on as a normal way of life, they can all become purified if they hear about Krishna from a pure devotee, if they hear about Krishna's glories from the mouth of a pure devotee, right? So this was predicted long, long ago, by Srila Shukadeva Goswami in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And, material nature works in such a way that it's always, especially in the Kali Yuga, it's always trying to cover the pure devotional process, right? So we see that things can get off to a good start and then get kind of muddled up. Why? Because we have material desires, right? That's why the Bhagavatam is so special, like the very second verse, completely rejecting all religious activities that are materially motivated. this Bhagavatam propounds the highest truth, right? So constantly that needs to be focused on, right? You see, like, just for instance, this concept of Westerners, Africans, Southern Hemisphere people, all kinds of different people, Mongolians, Chinese, right? Becoming pure devotees of Krishna, right? So that information was given and it's understood. Narada Muni, when he was speaking to King Yudhisthira, I'm just going to read the verse. Srila Prabhupada would quote this verse a lot, and there's a reason. Give me just one sec. Tried to pull these up. This is, Narada Muni is describing to King Yudhisthira, the Varnas, and he says, Yasya yao lakshanam proktam, pumso varna biv yanjakam, yad an yatrapi drishyeta tat tenaiva venir dishet. If one shows the symptoms of being a Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, or Shudra, as described above, even if he has appeared in a different class, he should be accepted according to those symptoms of classification. So this is a very important verse. Another of the important verses that's kind of setting the stage for what Srila Prabhupada has done, right? Because very quickly you see that a class of people will want to bring in some material motivation into pure spiritual processes, right? So this can happen very, very quickly. So Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appeared, right? And with the Panchatattva, and they broke open the storehouse of love of God, and they plundered its contents, and they made no distinction who was a fit recipient or who was not, where was a fit place to distribute love of God and where was not, what was the right time. They didn't deal with any of that. They just gave love of God, just unrestrictedly. That was their mood, right? But we see, even in such, Lord Chaitanya is the most magnanimous, the most munificent. We had this discussion a few weeks ago. These words describing Lord Chaitanya, Devotee Prabhu was pointing out, they each have their unique significance in describing the unparalleled mercy that Lord Chaitanya was giving to like everybody, right? But then we see, within a very short time, Prabhupada sometimes would talk about the Nityananda Vamsa, and this was a class of people who claimed to be descended from Lord Nityananda, and that if you want this, Gaudiya Vaishnava Bhakti thing, you got to get it from us. We're the doorkeepers, you know what I mean? So like, there were the Smarta Brahmins, very, very shortly. I mean, these things become entrenched. And, so after Lord Chaitanya and the Panchatattva, Narottam Das Thakur, the great acharyas were there, but the mass of people were no longer properly understanding Gaudiya Vaishnavism. There were many, many Apasampradayas that came up, and they were kind of muddying the understandings of Krishna consciousness that Lord Chaitanya had brought for everybody. So we see, like, these great personalities, they had to, like the six Goswamis, for instance, immediately after Lord Chaitanya, they scrutinizingly studied all the revealed scriptures with the aim of establishing eternal religious principles for the benefit of all living entities. They went through all the scriptures and brought the cream. So this was brought in such an amazing way, but still, even after a few hundred years, things were pretty messed up, So then we have our most recent generations of acharyas, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Gokishore Das Babaji Maharaj, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta, our Srila Prabhupada and Srila Prabhupada's representatives and followers. So they had so much work to do. Bhaktivinoda Thakur was a very respectable personality, very high position in society, and great pure devotee. And he looked around and he saw that, this is mess, And he worked very, very hard and very diligently to actually, almost unearth the pure teachings of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and to again, put them in the most prominent place so that people would understand, what is this Gaudiya Vaishnava movement? Like, that had to be done because you had the Sahajias on one side making it very cheap. You had the Smarta Brahmins and the Nityananda Vamsas making it into like a kind of a business, and like there was just a lot of misunderstandings. On the one side, it's like, crazy, and on the other side, it's kind of like you have to be born in a Brahmin family and you have to be this and that, and even Lord Chaitanya's time, who was it, that Subhuti Roy, right? He was, very marginally turned into a Muslim, It's a whole amazing pastime. But when he asked the Brahmins, how do I come back in, Hindu society, they said, you have to drink boiling hot ghee and leave your body. And he wasn't so sure about that. It's always good to get three opinions, And others said, no, you don't, So then finally he actually consulted Lord Chaitanya. And Lord Chaitanya, no. Chant Hare Krishna, go to Vrindavan, serve the devotees. And he accepted that. And he took that so seriously. Actually, when he went to Vrindavan, he had been a very big zamindar, very big landowner, and he renounced all that. And he went to Vrindavan, and he was living very, very simply. But he did start a business. He'd given up everything, but he started a business. You know what that business was? Firewood. Firewood. He would drag fallen wood out of the forest and make it nice and sell it. And so, how's this guy renounced? And he was selling it because the Bengali Vaishnavas would come to Vrindavan, and like in Vrindavan it's Vraj roti, and in Mayapur it's rice, and they weren't used to Vraj roti, so the Bengali Vaishnavas would come and they couldn't digest the food, right? They were getting ill. So he would sell this firewood to buy rice. Rice was not a common thing in that part of India in those days. It wasn't like now. So he would buy rice, and then he would nicely serve the Bengali Vaishnavas who were visiting, right? So anyhow, these caste-conscious distinctions were very, very strong. And so Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he was pushing back against this and actually bringing out the proper understandings. And it was a battle. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, such a battle, right? He was preaching this pure Krishna consciousness, right? And there was, he was coming to Vrindavan, he was coming, and he was initiating people from all social strata. And he was doing what the scriptures said should be done. He was exactly following this verse from Sanatana Goswami. He was transforming ordinary men into Brahmins and Vaishnavas, right? By having them follow the regulative principles, giving up sinful activity, chanting Hare Krishna, reading the scriptures, like molding their life, Prabhupada said, in such a way that one never forgets Krishna, right? So he was engaging him in that way. And they were coming on Parikram in Vrindavan, right? Some of the temples, they actually hired thugs, gundas, to throw rocks at them. So many things were going on because there was a lot of pushback, because these ideas were there that no, to be a Brahmin, you have to be born in a Brahmin family, and you have to come to us, and you have to pay us to do pujas and jagyas and all these things, In Navadvip, it was so serious that the chief of police came and said, I need to speak with you. He said, actually, we indulge in bribes, but you're a saintly person, so instead of taking the bribe, I've come to warn you. These people, they offered me 25,000 rupees to look the other way when something happens to you. Basically, they were going to try to kill Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, right? And these were the, so-called spiritual leaders of the day, right? So, these things were going on. There was a lot of pushback. So, that famous meeting when Srila Bhaktisiddhanta gave that famous lecture on Brahmins and Vaishnavas, right? And ultimately defeated all opposing views, right? So, I guess the point I'm trying to make is that for all of us here, many of us Westerners, to be sitting here engaging in the activities that we're engaging in, being initiated, Harinam initiation, Brahman initiation, sannyasa initiation, for these things to even be happening, right? So much work had to be done to kind of like clear the field on which we were going to act, right, in this Krishna consciousness movement, right? And that work was all done. This was the mission of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Lord Nityananda, Panchatattva, that this Krishna consciousness would be spread all over the world. But for that all over the world to be happening, so much has had to be accomplished, and has been accomplished by our acharyas, right? And then ultimately, there was the order by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, and this was an open order, that he wanted that this Krishna consciousness, his movement would spread out as in fulfillment of the prediction of Lord Chaitanya, Lord Nityananda, the desire. Bhaktivinoda Thakur was praying for this, when will the fortunate English and German and all these races be dancing down the streets of Mayapur with the Indian devotees chanting Jaya Satchinandana Gaura Hari, right? When he saw a newspaper article that he saw the Salvation Army was out ringing bells and singing on the streets, he saw that as a harbinger of the Sankirtan movement that would be coming to the West with Harinam parties. So these are the intense desires of the Lord and the acharyas that this would happen, right? And then Maya's always trying to, do her thing, right? Personality of Kali is always trying to do his thing, right? So these things aren't easy. So the Gaudiya mass spread like wildfire. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta developed such a strong movement against all that opposition, and it just thrived and it grew. Why? Because he was giving them substance. Substance. There's form and there's substance. And the substance is that somebody can practice Krishna consciousness and realize in the core of their heart that this is it. This is what I want to do with my life. This is all I want to do with my life, right? Right? And that substance needs to be there, and then people can actually go forward in devotional service. It's not dependent so much on all of the formulas. Vishnu Jan Maharaj used to preach like this. I remember once I think it's also recorded, he said, Jesus wasn't a Christian, Buddha wasn't a Buddhist, Muhammad wasn't a Mohammedan, you know what I mean? All of the organization comes after, right? So it's something we have to watch out for in religious movements. Mukunda Maharaj wrote a paper years ago called Form and Substance, and it was brilliant because it was just highlighting that in other words, the substance is what Srila Prabhupada gave us, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and all the acharyas gave us, the chanting and the shastras and the processes and the artis and the kirtans and the engaging our senses in all of this, right? This is the substance. This is where we actually feel our connection with Krishna. But to spread it far and wide, you need an organization. And Srila Prabhupada, he worked so hard to create this organization, which has spread Krishna consciousness all over the world. But still, over time, we have to also see that we're always reconnecting with the substance, right? With the point of the whole thing. That's why Prabhupada gave us Pancharatrik Vidhi and Bhagavat Vidhi, and he said you have to have both. Right? Examples are there. If you just have the Pancharatrik Vidhi, sometimes you go to these amazing temples in India, but the consciousness of the people worshiping the deities may not be always what we would expect, right? And Prabhupada gave this example. He said either there can be neglect, or Srila Bhaktisiddhanta coined this term using the Shaligram Shila as a nutcracker, right? So the idea is that either one gradually, in other words, if the Bhagavat Vidhi, if the hearing and chanting and remembering and really being fully aware of what this devotional service is and what it means to us, if one is just going on, with some seva, but one doesn't have the proper realization and one isn't engaging in devotional service in the proper way, then it can just become, Prabhupada said, instead of being the Archavigraha, it becomes Galagraha. Galagraha, heavy burden. My spiritual master's giving me this heavy burden. I got to get up at 4 o'clock, take a cold shower, trail this incense, ring this heavy bell. So either it becomes like that, and I'm going to go to college, become an engineer, and move to America, or no, we're going to make money out of this, right? And it doesn't have to be that. Obviously, there's many, many pure devotees and many, many pure temples, but it can come to that, and Prabhupada warned us about that, right? So this can happen, does happen, and will happen. And that is why Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya, right? We're engaging in devotional service, we're engaging in deity worship, we're doing all these things, but we're making it a point to have Srimad Bhagavatam class every morning, to constantly hear Bhagavad Gita class in the evenings, to constantly hear, to constantly refresh, to constantly revive, this consciousness, maintain this consciousness. It's so important, because otherwise, it can happen, just like in Catholicism, you see, every now and then you get a pope that like looks around and goes, oh my God, you know. Like when the new guy came in, one of the first things he did was he fired some cardinal or bishop in Germany. The guy was living in a palace and he had like tons of real estate, and you know, they're supposed to be like renounced monks, you know what I mean? But like it can happen, you know what I mean? So, you know, that's why, again, that second verse of the Bhagavatam, completely rejecting materially motivated religion. This Bhagavatam propounds the highest truth. We have to constantly focus back on that, right? Like, you know, I was reminded this, His Holiness Bhadrayani Maharaj was, you know, explaining kind of how they do things at the Krishna Lounge, you know, in terms of when they give the talks, you know, and he was mentioning, one of the things he mentioned was no ISKCON lingo, you know, because as an organization grows, you know, you become big enough that you start to have your whole own insular life, so to speak, you know what I mean? And then sometimes, if we're not going out and meeting the public and hearing and chanting and doing Harinam and selling books and, you know, distributing prasadam and interacting with people and inviting people to the temple, you know, we can gradually become the Boston Brahmins or whatever, you know, like it, you know, it happens. It's what happens in organizations, you know. So, you know, I remember some years ago, actually, when I lived here, and, you know, we were going on Harinam and passing out flyers to the temple, you know, and we used to have lunch oftentimes in the cooler months in the temple room, you know. And so one day, you know, we were all there having lunch, and then there was a guy came, and he was, you know, like one step up from a street person. You know, he had met the devotees downtown on Harinam. Downtown San Diego 25 years ago was not downtown San Diego now in terms of the people that were floating around, you know. So anyway, the guy came, and, you know, he was a little, you know, on the edge, so to speak. So afterwards, he had gone, and a few devotees were still there. And I remember there was a discussion, you know, and the discussion was, should we let people like that come to lunch? Because, you know, he didn't stink, but, you know, it was just a little gruff, you know, a little rough around the edges, you know. So, and, you know, devotees were giving their opinions, and I was listening, and it was interesting, you know. And finally, His Grace Dhruta Karma Prabhu, who lived here at the time, very famous author and science preacher, and so many wonderful qualities. He made what I considered to be, and what was in that conversation, the final point, so to speak. He said, well, if no new people are coming, you know, if everyone at lunch is completely pukka, and there's no new person who's not pukka coming, where is our preaching, right? You know, so, and not that we don't have to maintain the proper decorum, especially in the temple, but it was a very important point, because, you know, what is that Christian phrase? There but by the grace of God go I, right? So most of us, except for maybe some Gurukulis or some of our Indian devotees, you know, we have this experience, you know, like I mentioned that I had taken drugs when I was a very young teenager, right? And I may not be alone, you know. There may be saintly persons amongst us who have drank alcohol or who have, you know, walked on the wild side of this or that, right? And that's what's going on in the material world, right? But that's not what's important, right? What's important is that one has taken this process, one has received the mercy of the Vaishnavas, of the spiritual master, one has applied the process in one's life, and just like the bell metal turning into gold, one has become a Brahmin and, more important, a Vaishnava, right? Through and through, dedicated to devotional service of Lord Krishna. So, because many of us can, you know, we have that experience in our life, right? So, you know, we can kind of relate to people who may not be there yet in terms of, you know, their sadhachar. So, but it's very, very important, you know, that we keep this in mind, especially in this Kali Yuga, because we understand Kalo Sudra Sambhava. In the age of Kali, everyone is born a Shudra. Right? And Prabhupada explains this is due to the fact that the samskaras are not followed, right? Because to actually be born, quote unquote born, you know, as a Brahmin or whatever, you know, into a Brahmin family, there's Dasavida samskar. There's all these samskars, beginning with Garbhadan samskara all the way through life. And they're all very, very actually important, and they're all very, very potent, you know. And even in the so-called Brahmin families, in many families in India, they don't follow the samskaras. Therefore, in Kali Yuga, the scriptural injunction is Kalo Sudra Sambhava. Everyone is born Shudra. So, you know, that understanding is there. So, but everyone has the opportunity to take to Krishna consciousness, right? So, that's the point. And that's why a few chapters ago, the demigods, we learn, are standing in line to take birth in this Kali Yuga at this time when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement is spreading. Because in one short life, one can become Krishna conscious and go back home, back to Godhead, which is, you have Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, but then from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu we have Prema, Pumarto, Mahan, like this whole opportunity to even go beyond liberation to the point of attaining pure love for God, right? This is not ordinary, right? This is this very, very, very special mercy. So, anyhow, we're all participating in this movement by the grace of Srila Prabhupada and the previous acharyas, Panchatattva. All these great personalities have worked so hard just to create this environment and this opportunity for us. So all we need to do is take it, right? Like we fall into a body of water and we're not a real good swimmer and the waves are crashing and someone comes and throws a life preserver, right? Grab that life preserver, hold on to it with everything you got, right? That's what any sane person would do. And that's what's happened to us, right? Srila Prabhupada has thrown us that life preserver and he's pulled us up onto this ship of bhakti and we just have to stay on there, Sometimes the waves are tossing and it gets a little rough and this is happening and that happening and what about my mind, blah, blah, blah. But just stay on the ship, you know what I mean? Dance in kirtan, go out on book distribution, go on Harinam, cook the offerings, worship the deities, share Krishna in whatever unique way that we have to share it on the internet, you name it. Hrishikena, Hrishikesha, Sevanam, Bhakti Uchite. Use our senses in the service of Krishna, the master of the senses, and they'll become purified. We all have unique talents, unique inclinations, unique abilities, unique aversions. All that can be worked out just by becoming fully absorbed in devotional service under the guidance of Guru, Shastra and Sadhu, like that. So we're so fortunate, we've just been handed all this literally on a golden plate, So I'll end there. And if there's any comment, question, correction. And we just had this initiation the other day, right? So all these wonderful young men taking Diksha from a wonderful spiritual master. So Balaram Prabhu.
Yeah, it's a very dangerous mentality to cultivate or to not kill. That the mentality of like not making the environment welcoming for people, right. Because that's the whole point of of temples being in cities. The whole point of temples being in cities is so that people could be invited here, or else actually we have no business here in the city.
Exactly.
Devotees don't have any business in the city. We could go to the farm. It's to some countryside is much more peaceful, much more natural, much more actually how, according to our culture, we're meant to live. This is all artificial living, actually. But the only reason why we have the temple is so we can invite people and not just invite people so that they could actually feel welcomed. And if people are, it's very easy to make the environment unwelcoming to people. It's very easy. It's much more challenging to make it inviting to people. Like, so yeah, it's these devotees sitting around, and for the lunch, and Paka Brahmins sitting around having their Paka Prasadam, right, and everything's nice.
Another current subject, please.
I mean, it's pleasant. It's pleasant. It's transcendental. It's wonderful. It's just like Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastime. But because we're in a city, then there may be some people who aren't so paka, and we have to deal with them. And so, of course, there could be systems created where, whatever. But there should be we should be able to welcome people. Not that, people come and it's like, oh, great, another person and I got to deal with. And just like someone was telling me that there was a devotee in Los Angeles. So, we're not going to say who it is. And I don't know how long, I don't know if they're still there. This was 20 years ago. But there's one devotee and, he was being encouraged, hey, why don't you go and Harinam, go chant Hare Krishna on the streets, distribute books, whatever, go out and kind of meet the people, right? And he said, oh, meet the people. So it's people are so dirty, It's, I might become unclean if I go on Harinam, I want to stay here and, nicely bathed and, away from the dirty people. So, but it's, as you could say, it's extreme, but, there's different levels of that. So we want to try to create an atmosphere where we're welcoming to people. And if we can't do that, then, we could do some background stuff where we don't have to deal with. But anyways, sorry for the long, but.
No, thank you. No, that's really, really, really good point, and it's not that, like Prabhupada gives that example that according to the bodily distinctions, it's not that we don't, spiritual vision doesn't mean we don't make distinctions. Like Prabhupada gives that example that if I set a Brahmin and a dog next to each other based on Vijay Vinaya Sampane, we're going to feed you prasadam together, it's a very incompatible situation, right? Although from that, Brahma-Bhutta platform, if you're just looking at it in a certain way, yeah, But so those arrangements, practical arrangements have to be made. Obviously, like sometimes we would have food for life and we would go to the barrios where the more homeless people were and feed them prasadam. It wasn't the kind of people that you'd necessarily want, at the Sunday feast, perhaps, because some people don't smell, they don't bathe enough, things like that. At the same time, it has to be a balance, because if the mood, like Balaram was pointing out, we need to have that welcoming mood. It's so important, and there's ways to achieve that. Years ago, when Gunagraj Maharaj, Dhanavir Maharaj actually started, the Bhakti program up in L.A., and then he came down right when Gunagraj was taking Vanaprast. He had been our temple president, and then he turned over to His Holiness Bhadranarayana Maharaj. And so he, Dhanavir was down here, and they were working together, and they redesigned the whole, that front hall was just like a, guest come bhakta making machine, you know what I mean? Like, it's like the first room was the guest master who was Gunagraj, and then we had the video room, and then we had a room in here with a microwave to heat, all the offerings, certain offerings that devotees didn't normally eat were put in there, so any guests came, Prabhupada had said we should always have a certain amount of prasadam for guests who might come. And like the guest master was like working with all the devotees at the Sunday feast, okay, like he knew everybody who was coming, you preach to this person, you talk to that, just like everything was like, the Harinam parties, the invitations, and it was a really, really like a, very scientifically designed idea of how to expose more and more people to Krishna consciousness and how to make sure that when they got here, they were received warmly and, appreciatively, and they were welcomed, you know what I mean? And that's so important, and, again, on the discrimination level, like arrangements, can be made. Like I was in Sydney once, and their temple was in King's Cross, which, if you've ever been to Sydney, I don't know what it's like now, it's probably upgraded, but it was a rough part of town in those days. It was where all the all-night nightclubs and stuff, it was pretty wild because the Brahmachari ashram was two blocks from the temple. And you walk through the heart of King's Cross to get to the temple at Mangal Arti, and all the revelers were still out. It was like like Garnett Avenue on steroids, kind of. The Garnett Avenue meets Las Vegas and Sydney, right? So anyway, the Brahmacharis had to walk through that on the way to the temple. So there were also a lot of street people and people who had kind of become degraded by intoxication and whatnot. So they also had a restaurant at the temple. And out the back door, the next morning, they had a Food for Life where they served all the homeless people, So, like, it was all going on, like everybody was being taken care of, So, arrangements can be made, but the important thing is the mood, that we, like Balaram was pointing out, we have to have that welcoming mood, and that mood of really wanting to share Krishna consciousness and always remembering that, kind of like there, but by the grace of God go I, you know what I mean? Like any person who we don't think, here's a story, right? Last night I was walking down La Mesa street, I don't know, the main street in La Mesa. I'm staying with Mahabharat. He lives in La Mesa. And I found out that to give this class, and I was a little off yesterday because I was up late Sunday night, blah, blah. Anyway, I had rounds in the evening, long story short. So I'm walking, I took a japa walk, and I'm walking down La Mesa Street on the way back to Mahabharat's. And there's these two big, buff African-American guys coming towards me, and I'm going this way. And, I didn't think that we had that much in common. So anyway, right when they got to me, the one guy says to the other guy, "That's a bead bag," And I was like, "Oh, Hare Krishna, what's your name?" And he said, "Well, you might have known my father. My father was Shivananda Sain." He said, "Were you in San Diego, 30 years ago?" And yeah, matter of fact, yeah, I remember him well. He said, "Well, I'm that little boy that used to be on his hand. My name's Madhava, and I remembered him. He was that little boy that Shivananda would have by the hand, 30 years ago, 25 years ago, whatever it was." So, small world, and, I said, "We still have the Sunday feast, and, come on by." And, we had a nice little chat, and then he and his friend walked off. He wasn't a little boy anymore. He was about like 6'4" and weighing in at 250 pounds, very, very gentle soul, so, so you don't judge a book by its cover, you know what I mean? And of course, you Prabhus all know that, your own book distribution, right? Sometimes we look at somebody and think, here's a nice guy going to take a book, and the guy's like, and then the guy who looks like last guy in the world that's going to be interested, he buys a full set or something, so, it's like that. So, and I'll end with this, but I was in Mayapur a few years ago, and Hamsarupa told a story. He's back in New York now, right, TP, but he had joined in West 55th, right? And so he was telling some West 55th stories, and that was a skyscraper temple that Srila Prabhupada so much appreciated that they had in New York City, just off of Fifth Avenue, actually. So anyway, there was a lot, New York, biggest city in America, and at the time it also had the biggest population of street people. So along with all the, nice people coming to the temple, a fair number of street people would come, and so they had to, sort it out. It was a big temple, so they had a full-time receptionist, which is always a great idea, and so that the right person greets guests. And when they got street people, they had this thing where they had a little room on the side, and they would keep prasadam in there, and they would just, bring them in, sit them down, and feed them some nice prasadam, which is usually that's the devotional service that was right for them, and that was the outreach that was appropriate. Sometimes they didn't smell well, and, literally living on the streets in New York. I mean, there's no, we read about Prabhupada's Bowery Loft, sometimes they'd have to scoot the drunks to get up there for the programs, So anyhow, he was doing that reception duty, and different street people had come, and he was used to doing it. So one day some street guy came, and he had about 3 overcoats on, and it was a cold winter, and so he knocked on the door. It was kind of after hours. He was just about to go up to bed. And he almost didn't answer it, but he looked out and just saw the guy and thought, oh, what the heck, give him some prasadam. And he opened the door, and the guy says, "Is Swamiji here?" And he's like, "Do you know Swamiji?" And he's like, "Yeah, Swamiji here? I haven't seen him in such a long time." So he talked to this guy, and that guy was Robert Nelson, if you've read the Lilamrita. Robert Nelson, he was practically the first American who really rolled up his sleeves and started helping Prabhupada. Prabhupada was living by the arrangement of Dr. Mishra. When it became a little inconvenient to have Prabhupada right in his yoga studio, he put him in an office a few blocks away, and Prabhupada would have to go down to the other place to take a shower every day, and Prabhupada was tolerating everything. And, so this Robert Nelson met Prabhupada, and he would come every day. "How can I serve you, Swami?" And Prabhupada would send him on errands, and he would bring things for Prabhupada. He would see, and he was a little developmentally, not fully, slow, very functional, but a little slow. So, he didn't fit in the normal, society kind of go-getter type materialists. But he was helping Prabhupada. And then after a time, he, kind of disappeared. And so this is years later. So Hamsarupa had to break it to the guy that Prabhupada had left the planet, and the guy just broke down, But anyway, that was when they were doing the interviews for the Lilamrita. So Hamsarupa thought, wow, this guy knew Prabhupada in 1965 or whatever, So he said, can we connect you with these devotees that are doing the interviews for the Lilamrita? And he was interviewed, and Hamsarupa actually said that after that he started coming regularly. He actually became a devotee. and he actually got initiated. So what Hamza Rupa explained. So anyway, don't judge a book by its cover. And as Balaram was pointing out, obviously we have to use discrimination, but we should always be ready for that next Brahmin. Prabhupada said they're on every street corner. We just have to pick them up. And of course, you're doing it with the book distribution and the Harinam and so many wonderful programs. All right, so I'm probably running late. And there, thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Glories to Srila Prabhupada.
You mentioned that Bhakti
Oh, sorry.
that assassination.
Yes.
Or plot. That was before or after that talk, the Brahma's talk? That was after that? Or
That's a
even before?
good question. It was in the Navadvip area. Do you know? No, that was in the Navadvip area. Yeah.
I'm not sure what
Vrindavan, they were throwing bricks at him and stuff, and there was stuff going on. But I think the attempted assassination plot was, I might be wrong.
I'm
Maybe.
pretty sure that was in Vrindavan.
Oh, Vrindavan. Okay, I'm corrected.
That was, he had a whole pilgrimage on, yeah.
Right. Okay, yeah. So I stand corrected, yeah. That was in Vrindavan. But as far as the chronology, I'm not sure in terms of when that lecture was given. But, these were the things that were going on. I had a personal experience. I was in the Bahamas once, and I met an Indian person. They invited me for dinner, because I was an aspiring devotee. And they're going to invite their friends who were Bengalis. So everything was going nice. And the Bengali guy was really sweet. He used to go to the temple all the time, and he used to go to Mayapur. And he married this Bengali Vaishnavi, but she was from the caste Goswamis of Navadvip. And she started, just horrible things about Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, like these guys are still seething, because basically, when Bhaktivinoda Thakur moved, found the actual birthplace of Lord Chaitanya, it was their jobs, it was their money, and this downline, and I finally just had to say, Mataji, I can't even listen to any more of this, It was like I said, I'm just an aspiring devotee and you're breaking my heart, It's so sad to hear. I felt sorry for her husband because he was a nice guy.